Hello and welcome. On behalf of Erin Knight and Deb Everhart, I'm Ann Berry, and I'm pleased to be your host today. Our next speaker is Jennifer McNelly, President of the Manufacturing Institute, the nonprofit affiliate of the National Association of Manufacturers. In a partnership with Skills USA, Project Lead the Way, Degreed, and BYU's David O. McKay School of Education, the Institute is creating national manufacturing badges. These badges will recognize and credential the skills learned by students competing in the Skills USA program and participating in the Project Lead the Way curriculum. We're so excited to hear more about what's happening at the Manufacturing Institute. Thank you, Jennifer.
You bet, Ann, and thank you everybody for your time this afternoon. I've been monitoring the questions, so I'm going to try and work in some of the questions during the course of my overview on manufacturing and badges, and though Ann was generous with her introduction to note our youth development activities in partnership with Mozilla and others, I actually am going to take a much broader look at manufacturing and digital badges. And first off, whenever on the phone with a group of new colleagues, I always like to make sure they understand the Institute, and Ann did recognize our partnership with the National Association of Manufacturers, but the Institute is the affiliate to the NAM, and we wake up every single day worrying about the skills gap. Our sweet spot is really in serving as the national authority on the attraction, qualification, and development of world-class manufacturing talent, in part because that is so critical to our success as a nation. And when we talk about manufacturing, Pam actually mentioned this in her talking points, the student needs to understand the value. And in manufacturing, we actually have a number of challenges that I'm going to share, but in the end, when we look at manufacturing jobs, we look at the economic impact they have to economies and to communities, and they have the highest multiplier effect. So they create wealth, they mean jobs, it strengthens the U.S. economy. So manufacturing is pretty important, yet 3 out of 10 parents would encourage their kids to pursue careers in manufacturing. And this speaks to a lack of understanding as to the skills individuals need to be successful in a manufacturing career today. So that's important because I'm going to juxtapose that against some of the data that Ann put at the top end around what Manpower, actually a member of our Board of Trustees, has documented in general as to the skills gap. And then the Institute has long been known for the longitudinal data that we track around manufacturers and open jobs. And even today, and this was equally a number during the height of the recession, 82% of manufacturers can't find skilled workers. And I saw a couple questions in the chat box that spoke to, is this a disconnect in supply and demand, or is it a language disconnect? Or is it that we have individuals that don't have the right knowledge, skills, and abilities in the right place at the right time? And I would argue it's all of the above. And from an institute perspective, digital badging has actually been an important part of that solution. So first I'm going to take a step back and say, so in a room full of 100 employers, first and foremost, they'd say, if they just show up on time, I'll take it from there. And what I mean by that is manufacturers actually do invest in on-the-job training and do have tuition reimbursement programs, but are having a difficult time finding individuals that show up with basic skills that can pass the basic entry-level exam. So in the end, first and foremost, individuals need strong personal effectiveness skills. Many of you may be familiar with this competency model, but it basically stacks personal effectiveness skills, basic academic skills, work-based skills, and then industry technical skills. And I put this architecture forward because it really has informed how we have used digital badging in the market space. And I'll give you specific examples of each of its application, including veterans. So in the clip up front with President Clinton, it actually spoke to the role of digital badging in transitioning veterans. And when we look at our adult population and a lot of what Pam talked about with prior learning assessment, we're using digital badging in the context of prior learning. We equally have applied digital badging in some of the introduction that Ann shared about the Institute's engagement with us with youth development organizations has focused on digital badging. And then equally in our partnership with education institutions across the country, both secondary and post-secondary, we're using digital badging in the form of industry-based certifications. So if we have them from sort of every population base, transitioning adults, new entrants to the workforce that are in formal education programs, as well as youth development, all of them build on that competency model. So I'm going to start with youth and how we have applied badges to youth organizations. So if you'll recall, when I flashed up the competency model for manufacturing, one of the first levels of competency had to do with personal effectiveness, team building skills, ability to operate in teams, project-based learning activities. So from a manufacturing perspective, we're using digital badging to recognize students that participate in formal youth development programs that align to the skills manufacturers say they need. And in our kickoff activities with Mozilla and MacArthur, it's grounded in Skills USA and Project Lead the Way. So as most of you may know, Skills USA and Project Lead the Way are deployed in secondary education. And there is some Skills USA in community colleges and post-secondary as well. But for the most part, they're structured learning programs that students go through. And from an industry-based perspective, knowing that manufacturers care about students that can operate in teams, kids that have, in the case of Skills USA, they have an entire professional development program dedicated to ensuring kids understand the world of work. So from a manufacturing perspective, we consider them valuable skills that students learn at an early age, and we are badging those skills. So as they go through their careers, they can have the icons out in open space and say to a manufacturer, hey, look at me, I've been in a formal student leadership program that has enhanced my skills in the same kinds of skills that you look for in a manufacturing environment. We equally have applied them in the adult population, specifically with transitioning veterans. And as Pam noted, when we look at digital badging, we look at the youth development and the transitioning adults as incremental badges leading to an industry-based certification. And when we look at transitioning veterans, we all know that it's pretty difficult for an individual that is in a career in the military to easily translate into a career in the civilian workforce. So within manufacturing, we actually identified 11 core occupation areas, and then with the support of a technology firm, did a complete crosswalk of where individuals in the military actually had the same kinds of skills and competencies in those career occupations. So you see CNC machinists, electrical assemblers, logistical analysts. So in a direct crosswalk to ONET information and what the MLS codes were, we were able to pre-qualify or pre-identify transitioning veterans, and you see in the right-hand corner, manufacturing military badge. So individuals that sign up through our usmanufacturingpipeline.com website can claim their digital badge, and equally manufacturers can go out and search for veterans that have the kinds of skills that they're looking for. And I often give the example that they may have welded, but they're not a certified welder. So we sort of talk about it as the 60% match to direct employment for employers. When employers first and foremost want individuals with all of the key, ability to be dependable, flexible, reliable, show up on time, drug-free, all important components that manufacturers actually speak to, and they have technical aptitude and have even demonstrated some of the competencies. So in a military badging environment, we've done that. I want to say to date, we've badged close to 4,000 individuals in transitioning veterans in a number of our key states, where we're raising their visibility to manufacturers so that we can say, take a look at these candidates. They have the right kind of skills and competencies that you're looking for in your manufacturing workforce. And then I'm going to get into the formal credentialing side of it. And this is really at the heart of the Institute's effort to break the logjam between the education sector and employment. And some of the core themes I heard when I was looking at the chat box, there is a difference between training and education. And the approach that we took in manufacturing was if they were skills and competencies that had been defined by manufacturers and could be measured to a third-party, industry-driven assessment, they should have academic credit in an academic pathway. That if we value them as manufacturers, that in fact they should be deployed and drilled down and applied in the education pathway. So in 2009, we actually started a national partnership. We used that competency model, and we went out in the market space and said, okay, where has industry developed their own solution? Absent education, absent things like digital badging, where was the pain great enough that manufacturers created a transparent set of standards that they controlled, in some cases like welding, had been around for decades. And with that, we said to the education institutions, we are redefining what quality education in manufacturing looks like to an industry-based standard. And what that means from our perspective is a quality student graduating from a program of study in secondary or post-secondary education, and I'll just go back and use the welding example. It's one thing to say you're training to an American Welding Society standard. It's another to have students actually graduate certified to that standard, which meant within the academic process, the availability and access to that third-party assessment was available. And that, in fact, we set a national goal to make sure that 500,000 certifications were issued by 2016. And 2 years into our effort, I think there's probably 36 states or more across the country that are re-engineering and realigning their manufacturing education to an industry-based standard. And what I want to be clear on is, in some cases, it could be a short-term training program. But what has traditionally happened with this kind of training is it's sat on the side as customized job training. And what we're saying is, if in fact we value it, it should also be linked back to an academic pathway. So for a student who has a life and has a family and needs to pay rent and pay for a car, get them through training, get them an industry-based certification, and then if they want to come back with tuition assistance and other supports, they can continue their academic pathway and complete. And we have examples of that going on across the country in secondary institutions and in post-secondary institutions. And our next wave, based on our partnerships with community and technical colleges across the country, was we actually launched what's called the M-List, where academic institutions could formally apply to be recognized as a manufacturing education center of excellence, which from our perspective means they're training to an industry-based standard and students are graduating with that credential when they leave the program. So ideally, certified students, certified instructors, and certified programs. And what's important in that is the Institute is actually not an assessment organization, because one of the biggest gaps in information today is actually an understanding by employers as to what certifications exist, what value they have in the marketplace, and why they should even care. And probably next week or the week after, we'll release our second generation of our return on value study that looks at that from an industry perspective. And what we're starting to track from a data perspective is it does make a difference. It makes a difference to employers in recruiting costs. It makes a difference in turnover rates. It makes a difference, as Pam mentioned, in individual engagement. So I put together a whole list of an employer toolkit. We're just getting ready to do the next generation. There are education institutions that are on the line here. They're welcome to apply to be M schools. But we are part of the voice of educating the employers, because as I've seen in the chat box from some of our employers, this is incredibly difficult and incredibly complicated. And our job on behalf of our nation's manufacturers was to simplify it. But if you look for these skills, in the end, I always speak to manufacturer about being the 80% solution. If we can use the public trust of the education system to ensure that we have quality programs in manufacturing, it's an employer's responsibility to train them their way once they're in the door. But hopefully that gives a nice setup for what we're doing in manufacturing with digital badging.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, both of you. Jennifer, that was really a very enlightening presentation on what's happening in manufacturing.